Your promotion and your growth.
Thank you so much, sir. It's so good to hear that from you.
Yeah. No, I keep asking everybody like, hey, what exciting stuff is happening? And then they told me like you were the exciting stuff for this week, at least for me.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That
Yeah.
makes a lot.
No, I think it gives all of us a lot of energy when we see, folks kind of growing in their careers and making things happen. So good stuff. So
Thank you, sir.
I'm going to hand it over to Hoy and then we can always talk later. But
Sure,
congratulations.
sure. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
All right, welcome everyone to another Friday gathering with College UX Design Community. Welcome all the members who are present today in the Zoom call, and welcome all of you who are watching us on YouTube. This is going to be an Ask Me Anything session with our founder and chief instructor, Prasad. And we are we have received a few questions from many of you. So we will start with that. But over the next 1 hour, if any of you have any question who are watching us on YouTube, please keep them coming on the YouTube live chat. And we will try to cover maximum questions as much as possible. So without any further delay, I'll invite Prasad to take the stage while we move to our first question.
Virtual stage.
Virtual stage, yes. All right. The first question, I'm going to read it, is from Pranav.
Okay.
And his question is, what are the kind of questions we should ask our client from a UX designer's perspective? He has two different questions here. So from a UX designer's perspective, to design a project from scratch and to redesign a project.
Got it. So we have a couple of folks here who are also freelancers, and feel free to jump in if I've missed anything, guys. I mean, I'm looking at this as like a common conversation. But generally, when you're talking to a client, the client usually comes to the table with with an imagination of what they want their product to be, or they have a problem. So if they're redesigning it, they have a problem that they want you to solve. And they have a timeline in their minds and probably a budget. So, and usually what happens, unfortunately, is before you do the full scoping, usually the budget is decided between you and the client. So that is a problem. Now, if you've kind of not decided the budget and said, let's understand the scope and then figure out the budget, that's the right way to do it. So the way you want to basically approach it is really understand what is the problem you want to solve. Where do you think is the problem now? And also you want to understand how flexible or understanding the client is. So for example, if the client says, you know what, I just want a visual design. Okay. And you are saying, no, we need to do research. We need to do this. We need to do that. Now you need to understand whether the client gets what you're saying or they just have this thing in their mind. I just want to do this and you don't have any choice. Okay. So a lot of times it's about understanding those expectations. Now, you may have the opportunity to ask, hey, what is the problem you want me to solve? What is the core problem you have? And why are you asking me to solve that? So the client might come in and say, like, I want you to do a redesign of my screen because it's not working. Say, okay, can you tell me why it's not working? How do you know it's not working? Okay. So ask that why 5 times so you kind of get to the root cause. And once you get to the root cause, you and the client are on a similar page in terms of why something needs to be done. Now, what that also allows you to do when you ask those whys, it allows the client to kind of also think through and say, okay, is there a bigger problem in my mind? Or am I just asking somebody to put colors on my screen? And that is the place where you can have a dialogue and say, well, what has been working for you? What has not been working for you? How much time do you have? What are your plans after this? So after I do this, is there an engineering team that I'm supposed to collaborate with? So there are all these questions, because usually when you're working as a client or when you're working for a client, the biggest resistance comes with engineering. Because if you do not deliver something that engineering can code, they'll always say the designer didn't do their job. And so that's something that you will want to probably understand who are the stakeholders in the game so you can start building relationships with them. But overall, I think the highest level is understand what the client wants, what the timeline is. Is there any way that you can negotiate? Is there any way you can kind of put your perspectives into the game or educate the client? That's what you're thinking. And then you're also thinking, who are all the stakeholders? How do I partner with them? So those are the common areas that you would want to ask and probe around when you're working as a when you're working with a client. Anybody else have any other questions that you'd like to think about, guys? All right. So, hi, what's the next question?
Our next question is from Simran. And
Okay.
I believe Simran can ask the question himself because he has a story to tell.
Okay, go for it, Simran.
Hey Prasad, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I recently had a conversation with the Ola auto driver. The long story short is when I met him and gave him the OTP, he asked me how much was the amount, and he said cancel the ride and take it directly with me. And it was obvious that he wanted to do that because he didn't want to give Ola the commission. And I instantly told him that isn't this wrong, because like it's because of Ola that you're even having so many rides available to you. So isn't it wrong that you like sort of cheat the system, right? And he sort of agreed with me, but he said that Ola is like taking a lot of commission and they're not able to survive, blah, blah, blah. He gave the story. And we were in the ride and he was sharing something. And I just thought, what if I start a company similar to Ola? And where one of the biggest realizations I will be having is my most important assets for the user experience is the drivers, because the app for Zomato and all these things would not survive without the delivery partner. So they are the most important people in that entire experience of logistics, right? I was thinking if I start, so currently Ola's business model is they give commission to these drivers, right? So I was thinking if I start a company similar to this, if I, after about 2 years or 3 years of service that a particular, driver gives me, I will convert them into a salaried employee and they will get benefits that every other person in the company gets.
Okay.
What happens with that is I get a loyalty, my major loyalty from and if everything goes well, then what happens is after about, let's say 10 years or 5 years itself, a lot of people from the other companies, other delivery, transport applications will probably come here because of the fact that they get treated respectfully and stuff. So things that Ola and all the other companies will have to change their strategy and stuff, right? So the question that I raised over there was, how easy is it to change a particular business model? Like, for example, if this goes well and Ola sees this as a threat, they'll have to rechange their entire strategy as to how to retain their employees, right? So now if Ola does it really quickly, then I will probably lose because Ola has a bigger market share. But then if Ola takes a while, then I would be able to like retain a lot. So I just wanted to ask this to you about business models and how long does it take to implement something like this of the scale? Because the same thing happened with telecommunication. When Jio came in and they gave unlimited messages and stuff, Airtel and all these guys had to really like change things a lot, and there were a lot of layoffs, a lot of hiring that they were doing that time. So
right. No, I really like that idea. I mean, not the idea, but the pain point that you identified.
Yeah.
Right. So the core pain point that you've identified is when you're talking about gig workers. Gig working economy is interesting in its own way because on one side, as a gig worker, you have a lot of freedom to do what you want. You have a lot of mobility, which is, and it's the ability to kind of get your jobs very, very quickly. You're not wasting time. But on the other side, what happens is you lose the protections. of being a labor force within a company, right? So when you're kind of thinking through that, if you do not have the protection, then again, this is where every individual is kind of trying to balance, because like, yeah, I want to have my own flexibility. I want to do my own thing, but at the same time, the company is not giving me enough money or whatever. And there's always that trade-off. It's a very interesting problem to think through. All right. Now, if you remember how Uber started in India or wherever, whichever market they go to, how do they start? Okay. The first thing they do is they say, we are pro employees. We are pro the gig worker. So, you're going to get so many incentives. You're going to get so many things. So everybody and their grandmother joins the ecosystem. Okay. Now, once you have X number of gig workers, a critical mass of gig workers into the game, then they turn it around and they say, okay, now, you can, let's get the customers in. And now once you've invested, and this is where they create a moat. And the moat is you've taken a loan on a car and you have EMIs on that. Okay. Now, as the incentives go down, you have to keep riding because now you are stuck in that game. Right. Or maybe you probably resigned your job or did whatever. Now you still need that cash. So you need to keep driving it. And so that's where it's always a very interesting thing in terms of so initially Uber was spending a lot of money, right? And Ola is also spending because there's a huge capital expenditure. It's a huge expenditure. It's not a capital expenditure, but it's a huge expenditure in terms of salaries, incentives, and all of that stuff. But then after a while, that expenditure, people try to extract the value out of that expenditure. All right. So that is the way most companies have basically gotten into the market, including Ola, including Uber, and all these guys. So now when you think about it from your perspective, is there a way that you can do it where you are humane and you're not necessarily going up and down? Right? I think there are opportunities, but you really do need to think through it in a lot more detail. Okay. If the simplest thing is I'm going to get a bunch of people on my salary. So there are legislations, there are, what do you call statutory compliances that you need to do for people who are paid less than a certain amount. Okay. So for example, if you are somebody that is a gig worker, if I'm supposed to pay you 12 rupees, I'm paying you 12 rupees or $12. That's what it is. It's $12. But if you are, let us say, working with me as an employee, then I'm paying you the $12 plus your retirement, plus your insurance, plus all these other things that come with it. Okay. So now what is also interesting is the risk also gets shifted. So if you were an independent worker, you get hurt during work, it's your problem. Okay. But if you are my employee and you get hurt during work, it's my problem. So the cost structures increase very dramatically. So, there is this whole model of for every dollar that is paid to, an employee, there is also probably about 20 to 30 cents that you have to pay in addition from somewhere else. Okay. And that's one of the reasons why gig work has worked out well, because individuals want freedom. Companies don't want want all that hassle. So it kind of has worked out that way. Right. However, now the pendulum is swinging the other way, because people are realizing, wait, gig work is not everything I imagined it to be. I want something else, right? And this is where the opportunity is, because now people's perceptions are moving towards that safety model, okay? And you are kind of thinking through like, okay, how do I create that ecosystem? So again, I would advise that whatever ecosystem you need to create, it's probably about 6 to 7 months of intense hard work in one geography. And you probably need to have deep pockets to be able to pull it off.
Okay. No, I'm wondering if the funding and all is arranged. I'm just trying to think up. The question was solely focused on changing the competitor's business model of being a threat, seeing threats. And
so if you're trying to be a threat to, say, Ola, and your intention is to force the other company to do good,
yeah.
Okay, then it's, you're talking years, because at the end of the day, you're just in one geography, the other company doesn't care. You have to be in probably every geography that the competitor is, or in a significant percentage of an overlap.
No. I'm just thinking across the entire thing. My question is, how long will it take? Like, let's say Ola realizes that this is the reason why they're losing a lot of a lot of their employees, their drivers.
Mhm.
And then they'll have to make a decision saying, okay, from next month onwards, we'll have to incentivize our staff and give
Correct.
them employee benefits and
Correct.
stuff. So to make that decision and to implement that, how long does it take on average is where my question was.
You're talking maybe 30 days, 30 to 60 days.
Okay.
Okay. Once Ola realizes there's a risk, you probably have some financial guy running all the numbers, all the implications, all that stuff, and then you basically will start seeing plans come out within 30 to 60 days.
Okay. That's what I wanted to know. Okay.
Okay, a long story. Okay, so next time if you think I'm going off on a tangent or explaining more than I'm supposed to explain, just raise your hand and let me know.
It was interesting the what you said.
Cool.
Types of things. Thank you.
Thanks, Imran.
Our next question is a very interesting one from Rashmi. I can see that she's here. She can also participate. But I will set up the context before asking the question. She mentioned that since last 5 years, she has been designing a product.
Okay.
And very recently, she has acquired UX knowledge. Now, after 5 years of designing that product, she is now able to find flaws in her previous design, right?
Okay.
Now, what she is saying that I am trying to introduce or change my own design, and it often raises question in my company. So how do I handle this situation at my workplace?
Rashmi, I want to fist bump you, man. This is awesome. Like, I mean, just by hearing that makes me feel so happy because you are so committed to your work, and I really respect that. So I think to answer your question, you have to understand that a design that works today will not work, even if, I'm a perfect designer, which I am not, and I'm designing the perfect product today, the same product will not work tomorrow. Because your customers are changing, your users are changing, their expectations are changing. I mean, think about if Windows was perfect when it was launched, why do they need to launch a new version? Right? So you are always thinking about new versions, new changes, new fixes, just because the customer is changing, the market expectations are changing, as well as the feature sets are changing. Okay. So from your perspective, I think it's a fairly common, you don't need to say that I did a mistake. I mean, okay, the users have changed, people's expectations have changed, and therefore this model is different.
Correct.
That's all you need to do. And you don't need to explain to people like, yeah, I made a mistake at that time or this or whatever. I mean, again, no designer is perfect. Even when I do my designs, even when I go into usability testing, I realize, oh, wow, there are 15 things I messed up on.
Right.
So you don't need to worry about that. And again, if the company is going to be short-sighted about it, say you did it well, you say, do you have the same customer that you had 5 years ago? That's a simple question that you probably want to ask your company.
Right.
So in the 5 years, Google has launched like 2 different versions of, their UI toolkits. Everything is moved to a different format. So again, there's lots of space to kind of tell the company that, guys, it needs to change. We need to refresh.
Yeah. Thank you, Prasad.
Cool. Awesome. But love your attitude behind that. Love it. Cool. So what's the next question?
Our next question, we are taking that from YouTube. So Kondal, who is our regular YouTube viewer, he's asking, what would be the ideal career line for a designer turned usability and accessibility consultant?
So does a consultant mean that, so this usability and accessibility consultant is a new title for me because I'm trying to figure out, it's probably, can you give me 1 second? I'm just going to be back. One. All right, sorry. So I think when somebody says it's a usability and accessibility consultant, I'm imagining it's got something to do with research, right? So somebody is probably driving research, and if Kondal does not agree, then just ask him to clarify and I'd be happy to answer. It's just a different discipline. Within design, you have interaction, visual, and research. Those are the most common, existing structures. And so when you're saying I'm going to be a usability and accessibility consultant, most likely I'm imagining you're doing research and you're kind of transferring over. So that's pretty much what it is. It's just a different discipline. Your career path, though, however, this is what I've always found is interaction designers grow the fastest within their organization. Right? The visual folks generally tend to be, they tend to start faster, but they stagnate over time. And then when you look at the researchers, they always struggle because they have a lot of data. They're struggling to create an impact within their organization. So again, there are challenges within each of those roles. Is not to say that I've not seen these guys grow up into roles. But the thing is, for a usability consultant, the goal is that you need to figure out how you're going to take your findings and get them implemented into a product. That is the primary thing. If you can get it into products and you can get it prioritized and you can influence the product, that's how you grow in your career. Hope that answers the question. I know it's not a very satisfying answer, but the way I see it is just a different specialization within design, and your career it continues on with the challenges in that specific discipline.
All right. So our next question is very much linked with what you just said. It's from Harshita, and she is asking, as a beginner UX designer, what should be my approach for getting a role of a UX researcher? Any resources that would be helpful for theoretical knowledge of research, and how can I practice or improve my research skills?
Got it. So I think if you're in my career within design also started as a researcher, so I can probably give a reasonable answer on that one. And the idea is fairly simple. If you're starting off your career, the absolute, minimum non-negotiable that you should be doing is you should be understanding biases. You should be understanding how to ask questions. You should be understanding how to synthesize data, and you should be understanding how to present your findings in a impactful manner. These are the common skill sets that doesn't matter what research methodology you're using, these skill sets have to be used. Okay. Now, at the next level, when we are thinking about it, it's, once you know this, what are the methods that you need to learn? The most simplest method that you need to know is usability testing. Okay. Now, within usability testing, there's a new flavor, which is remote usability testing, which is a slight variation of that. But again, if you can do a basic usability test without biases, synthesize the data, present the findings and stuff like that, that is the first step to getting it into the market. After that, you gradually expand your scope into qualitative methods as well as quantitative methods. Now, today in the market for research, there's a lot of demand for quantitative researchers as well. So people who understand numbers, people who understand statistics. All right. So yes, Chaya. 1 second, madam. Okay, give me a second, Chaya. Okay. All right. So my wife's at the doctor and I'm kind of taking care of the baby. So, all right. So I think then you're talking about additional methods that go on top of that. All right. And it's a very simple game that you have to think about is you have quantitative and qualitative methods. And ideally, people need to start thinking about more quantitative methods if you want to kind of grow into that space and have a much stronger career when compared to other researchers in the space. And that's the simplest answer that is out there. And oh yeah, so research, what are the materials that you can learn? So we have a whole introduction to research. How, if you can put it in the link, We have a complete video about research methodologies, how to approach research, what are the different methods. We've also got videos about how to think about research questions, how to ask without biases and stuff. I think all those things we can put in the links to our YouTube videos and people can access those. We also have Medium articles about different research methods. And if we can put those Medium article links as well within the YouTube video links, I think that'd be great.
Sure, Prasad, I'll do that. Our next question is from Huzef, and he is asking, I have got my first freelance UX design project. Congratulations. Can you please give me some guidance on how to approach this project as a UX designer, given that it's an internet radio and podcast domain?
See, I think the simple question that you need to be asking is, what is the problem I'm solving that other people have not solved? Okay. If you have competitors, you need to make sure that you need to think about how is your product going to stand out in a market where everybody is doing the same thing. Okay. So the founders or the folks that have hired you will probably have an idea like, okay, how are you different from everybody else? Okay. Now, once you understand how you are different from everybody else, the simplest way is when you're doing, make sure you spend your time doing timelines, plan your activities. All right. You say, there's going to be X amount of time for research, X amount of time for, we are going to do sketches. And one thing you want to do is, this is something that I've seen when people do freelancing. These are common pitfalls. We will do the complete visuals and everything. We take it to the client and the client will say, can you move this here? Can you move that there? So what happens is a 1 month project ends up becoming a 5-month project. A profitable project becomes a loss-making project. Okay. Because if you were, let's say, making $100,000, dollars over a 1 month, it's a profitable thing. But let's say you now have to pull it across 5 or 6 months. You're now technically only earning about 20,000 a month. That's actually a loss-making initiative. So the way you want to basically think about is, how do I make sure that the project does not extend? So a couple of tricks, get aligned with what the customer wants, document everything, write minutes of meetings. Okay, share that with everyone. Now, if tomorrow a client comes back and says, hey, I want you to change this, share the minutes of meetings, says, well, we discussed this, and that's why I did this. You are asking me to change the requirement, so it's going to increase the amount of time and it's going to increase the cost. Okay, and understand freelancing is about making sure that you're paid fairly for your time. Okay, and that is the most important thing as part of the freelancing game. So always document everything, always keep the customer in the loop, get an agreement at a principal level. Do not go to the visuals and get the agreement. Just do basic sketches, get agreements at that level, understand what the problems are, and then gradually increase the fidelity. Okay, the more agreements you can get before you put in the effort, the better you are. Okay, because if you put in all the effort and then people ask you to change it, you're kind of going to start losing money and you're going to get very frustrated with that project. Hope that answers the question.
All right. Our next question is also from YouTube. Jignasa, she is asking, what skills or knowledge would be most important to develop in order to successfully transition into UX designer as a freelancer without having any prior experience as UX designer, but having 8 years of experience as graphic designer?
Got it. So graphic, and let me actually take a step back and explain what is the difference between a graphic designer and a UX designer. Okay. When you are a graphic designer, you are designing one artifact at a time. So if you're designing, let's say, a business card, that's one artifact. You're designing a poster, that's one artifact. Every artifact is different. When you're a UX designer, you are creating rules that are applied to create many, many screens. You are probably going to be talking about hundreds or thousands of screens over a period of time. And again, you're not just thinking when you're working, but possibly, after you're done with the project, somebody's going to keep extending the project, right? There'll be new screens, new requirements, new changes. So the idea is, when you're a UX designer, you're thinking at a framework level. You're thinking, how does the page look? What are the different spaces? And how would it work under the same page, work under different use cases? So for example, how would a page work if there was an error? Okay. How is a page work if a module did not load? Okay. So you're thinking about multiple use cases and situations in which that page might be used, or the same visual design has to be leveraged in multiple screens. Okay, so essentially what you're doing is you're stopping the thought of one artifact at a time, and you're thinking of, how do I write requirement once and create 100 screens at the same time? So that is the difference. Okay. Now, the second aspect is UX in itself is a science. So there are different disciplines that you need to learn. So number one is form design, right? You need to know how to do form design. The second aspect that you also need to learn is, how would you evaluate and audit a product? How will you tell whether a product is working or not? So you need to have the basic audit skills. Okay. Then you need to have a very basic understanding of, well, how would you do a workflow? These are just, simple exercises, but there are workflows that you can kind of think about. How will you design a workflow? How will you solve the problem? Who are the users? How do I connect the user to this specific workflow? Those are the skills. But again, if you want to transition immediately, the most basic skills that you need to do is think about at a framework level, form design, audit skills. If you have those, you can start off your career and then gradually learn, the interaction design components as well as the research components as you keep moving along. All right.
Right. Yeah. So moving to the next question.
Okay.
It's from Nagasai, and the question is, what is the difference between behavioral research and attitudinal research?
Got it. So simple thing is, understand what's the difference between an attitude and a behavior. So the simple point I would ask is, hey, is bribery bad? Chances are all of us will say bribing is bad. Right? That's an attitude. We all share that attitude. But now the question is, let's say you were stopped at a traffic stop by a cop. Would you pay a bribe? Maybe. Right? So that is behavior. So what happens is, how we think about what we are going to do versus what we really do in a situation is very different. That is the difference between an ideal situation and the real world. Right? In an ideal situation, bribery is bad. Everybody would agree. In a real world, when you're in a pickle and you need to get out of it, it's a question, isn't it? And that is exactly what is the difference between behavioral research and attitudinal research. Attitudinal research will tell you what would the individual do in an ideal world. Behavioral research tells you exactly how the product is being used, what the specific problems are on the ground. Okay. Now, which is why my preference generally is attitudinal versus behavioral. When you're doing the research, you should not spend, 20% attitudinal, 80% behavioral, depending on the type of research question is better. If you're trying to figure out how a product works, focus more on the behavioral, focus less on the attitudinal. Okay. If you are thinking about, hey, I want to create a brand new product and all that, you want to focus a little bit more on the attitudinal and then reduce your behavioral. But still, behavioral is going to be very important. It might be a 40-60 ratio. Okay. But ideally, you're trying to figure out, okay, what do people ideally want and what is it that they're getting in reality, and how do I solve that problem practically? Okay. Does that, hopefully that'll answer the question there.
Our next question is,
Narsimha, I see you. We'll, ask a couple more questions and then we'll get to you. Okay.
Okay, Prasad.
Good.
I'm good. Then I lower my hand.
Okay.
okay.
Thanks.
Our next question is also from Huzaiv. It's his second question. what are some best practices for identifying and prioritizing new features for a product that needs a redesign?
So this is a very broad question. So because, from what I'm understanding is if you've got a bunch of features that you need to design or redesign, how would you prioritize it? At least that is the way I'm understanding that question. So if we are looking at that question, the ideal way that you would want to look at is look at frequency and impact. Okay. How frequently will a product be used? And what is the impact of that feature, right? So how frequently will that feature be used? What is the impact of that feature? Okay. Now, when you start looking at the list of features and you look at the frequency and impact, you very quickly start realizing which ones have to be higher priority versus lower priority. Okay, that's the simplest way that I would say that if you want to prioritize a list of features within your exercise or within your product portfolio. Narsimha, while Hoy is getting ready, you want to ask your question?
Prasad, my question is what are the opportunities in USA for a UX designer in an entry-level job? For an entry-level job, because I see wherever they are asking for 7 years, 8 years, or more than 10 years experience in the UX design. So as I'm trying to switch my career from my current technology to the UX, so what are the how much percentage I can assume is there any options for the freshers or entry-level jobs? What I can expect from them?
I think there are always options. However, I do want to say is with ChatGPT being launched in November and today, I'm not sure how many of you have seen this in the newspaper. IBM has eliminated 8,000 jobs altogether, permanently eliminated, right? So this kind of changes are going to happen more and more. Complete roles are being eliminated. So I think the core aspect that we look at is, are people going to understand AI and learn how to use it, or are people going to get replaced by AI, right? So I think the opportunity there's always right now, because of the economic situation in the US as of today, there are a lot of talented, experienced folks in the market that are getting picked up. Okay, so freshers are going to have a little bit of a challenge. I suspect it's going to take about a year to 18 months to resolve, and then the opportunity will open up for freshers. Okay, that's not to say that there's no freshers job right now. So this is where you have to stand out in a unique way compared to everybody else in the market. Okay, and so this is where your portfolio, the way you communicate, the way you pitch, the kind of projects you're doing, those are the things that you're helping. So I know that you're working as a developer. Now, the question is, if you're working as a developer, can you actually build your portfolio while doing that? So maybe you can do some UX level work and you can kind of start building your portfolio as part of your current role. Extend yourself a little bit. And that automatically creates an opportunity where you're not a fresher in the market. You are somebody who's kind of growing to the next level based on your existing portfolio.
So I just want to add to this, as of now, I'm working as a business technical analyst in one of the company here, which is Rivian Motorways. We have a UX team here. Can you suggest me a way to approach a UX team? Is there any opportunity, or I just want to see what they are doing in the company. Is there any way how can reach them, or I can talk to them? How I have to
take them out to coffee, man. That's the best way. It literally is the best way. It's worked out.
The thing is, I don't know them. I don't know them actually. They are from different team. That's the thing.
That doesn't matter. Just introduce yourself and say, hey, can I buy you coffee? I'd like to know more about what you're doing. That's it.
Sure. I'll try that. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Thank you. I'll try that.
Awesome.
All right. Our next question is also from YouTube and from Jignasa. What are the particular processes and methods that are essential to understand and implement effectively in order to create a successful user experience?
This literally is a one-year class.
Prasad, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. So let me start off. I think at a very high level, you have to understand there are 3 or 4 different roles that play out here. There's interaction visual research, and then you have prototyping. Okay. Now, within these different roles, you have, there's a process for going out and observing. There's different kinds of research that you can do, where you are just observing, you're doing, what do you call, greenfield research, where there's nothing out there and you're trying to learn what's happening. So that's one type of research. The second type of research is you have an existing product, you're telling whether what the health of that product is. There's a third kind of research where you are scanning the market to understand how the market is transforming. All right. Then within that, you're now converting into requirements and you're synthesizing the data. So this is a process itself. Once you synthesize the data and you prioritize it, you're sharing it with your counterparts within product engineering. So there are processes and systems for how to get buy-in within the organization, right? There's storytelling techniques that you want to learn about how to tell stories. Then when the interaction designer is taking it on, they're looking at how do you synthesize the problem? How do you identify the specific users? How do you create workflows for individual problems? All right. Now, once you do that, how are you optimizing? How are you correcting for errors? How are you, looking for learnability, habit formation? Those are the kinds of things that you want to think about when you're doing the product. And finally, when it comes to the visual component, you're actually thinking how it plays out in different forms and, tablets, mobiles, and all that stuff. You're also, and again, it doesn't mean that only visual guys do it. Interaction guys will also be thinking different form factors. Research guys will also be thinking different form factors. But again, because visual is now bringing it all together. Now you're thinking about how do you get all these problems fixed into a common layout. Okay. And how do you design typography? How do you design layouts that are extensible? How do you create design systems? So those are all the other processes that you want to learn as you're doing the visual component. Now, again, this may seem very overwhelming, but the point is when somebody gets into design, they don't do everything. They're probably getting into one area and know something about other areas. So that's what it is. So you figure out what specialization you're going in and you learn other areas that you can, that you want to have just enough knowledge so you can collaborate with those areas.
All right. So this one is the last question as of now received. This is also from Nagasai. The question is, can we get some more practical examples of think, feel, say, and do, other than the examples used in the user personas workshop?
Okay. So let's think about think, feel, say, and do. And again, this is a beautiful way because there was a previous question that where people ask, what is the difference between attitudinal and behavioral? So this is a very similar kind of a model. What do people think about something? Okay, so I'm going to take the whole idea of corruption because it's we've kind of talked about it before, and I'm going to carry that idea on. What do people think about corruption? Okay, well, it's bad. Okay, what do people feel? Right? If you're taking a bribe, okay, maybe, right? If you're giving a bribe, how does that work? Right? You probably feel violated. You feel like, okay, yeah, it's against what you feel. So you're probably feeling dirty when you're doing it. Right? What do you say? Okay. What do you say? Ideally, I think it's bad, but in this case, like, yeah, that cop was bad. So you are now creating an excuse in your mind to basically say, okay, this cop was bad, so I didn't have a choice. Or this X individual was bad, that's why I didn't have a choice. Okay. And do is you probably either gave or you basically did not give, right? So the idea is when you look at this think, feel, say, and do, the difference between all of this is where innovation happens. Okay. So for example, you feel dirty about it. Okay. And at the same level, hey guys, can you guys hear me? Is there any disturbance? Okay, awesome. So the challenge is when you're thinking about how do you innovate? So I know a guy who's, this guy is really smart. So what he's done is, yeah, the cop, when he's taking the bribe, is like, yeah, everybody else is doing it, so I'm doing it too. So what this person would do is this, okay? He would be there and he'd be sitting there, and then somebody is asking for a bribe, is like, give me $100 or whatever, he'd give the $100, and then he'll say, okay, may I have the receipt, please? And the other person say, oh, I can't give you a receipt. Like, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize that there's no receipt. I'm sorry, I can't give you the money. Please give me a ticket instead. And he'll take the money back. What do you think that, or he'll put the money back in the wallet. And his experience is 9 out of 10 times, the cop is so embarrassed that they will say, okay, please, I'm sorry, keep going. Because you are bringing their behavior to the fore. And this is exactly what it is. This is where the innovation happens, because even the cop is probably thinking, I don't want to take it. Or, everybody around me is taking it, so maybe I am peer pressured into taking it. So there is a story there on that other side as well. So understanding the difference between this think, feel, say, and do creates opportunities for innovation.
Awesome. So that's all the questions received so far. Now we can open the forum. If you have any question, yes, Achyut.
Yeah. Go ahead, Achyut.
Yeah. So good evening, everyone. So my question is like, how do I, as a UX designer, when I give my design for the developer handoff, how would I understand? Okay, if there is a problem in that, I'm trying to have a challenge. Like, I'm trying to understand: is the problem coming because of the programmer's incompetence, or a problem in my design? Because at times what happens is, especially, and so thank you so much about your video on variabilization on the widget level. That's putting me out in a different way out there at work. So
Awesome.
because I'm saying this because we are thinking so much on a widget level, like each element of the UI visual design. But the developer will say, the other day in the Feedback Friday also, they were telling, like, if I shape code an input field that gives us significance for the user, that okay, these are the number of digits and the kind of input that I need to give, even probably without reading the label. But the designer is like, okay, I have to write extra lines of code.
Mm-hmm.
If they say this one, I'm able to understand that, okay, this guy is a lazy guy.
Mm-hmm.
But how do I really understand if there is a problem with my design, or it is coming from an incompetence from the developer end? Because I have zero. And this is a very ego crashing thing. So I'm trying to be very careful with that.
Right. No, so I think let's rephrase the problem that you're saying, right?
Yeah.
I have done development as well when I was starting off. Okay. So developers by training we have to be lazy.
Right.
We have to be lazy, because how do I create optimized code if I'm not lazy?
Yeah. To decrease the engineering debt.
Sorry?
Is it like to decrease the engineering debt?
Yeah. I mean, engineering debt is a different concept. It's a different question altogether, because you keep doing fixes and all that. In the long term, then, you'll have debt that accrues and you have to go fix it at some time. That's a different problem altogether. But the problem here is when I'm developing, I have to find the most optimal way to develop.
Yes.
Okay. And so that is the problem that the engineer is trying to solve. And so when you give them a new widget and this widget is not consistent with the previous widget and you have to change even 1 or 2 lines of code, that means you have to, you're creating one more widget that needs to be maintained in the long term. That creates engineering debt. Okay.
Right.
So to appreciate how the engineer thinks about it, it's always about optimization. Now, from your perspective, the question you have to ask is, have you optimized? Right. So simple ways, when you create a widget, redline it. Are you familiar with redlining?
Not really, Philip.
So I'm assuming you do Adobe XD?
Figma.
Figma. Okay. Figma will have plugins that will do redlining for you. Okay.
Okay.
Redlining is simply, it's a widget where you see these red lines that says this is 20 pixels high, this is 30 pixels wide, the padding is 2 pixels. So that is redlining. It's called redlining.
Okay. Got it. Yes.
Okay. So Figma has plugins that will do redlining. And so when you do the redlining, what you need to do is compare it with the other widgets and say, okay, how different is this redlining? Even if you add 1 pixel, it's an extra line of code that the engineer has to write. Okay. So from your perspective, you're always thinking about how easy is it? What is the minimum changes I need to make at a visual level to be able to make the new widget work? Okay. That's one thing. The second thing is when you're looking at the widget, you are basically saying, okay, in this widget, how do I, how does it look? How does it behave? You have to write those rules down very, very clearly. Okay. A lot of times designers just give how it looks, but they don't talk about how it works. Okay. And how it works is also in terms of escape cases, right? So what if there's too much data? What is there's too less data? What, again, all the stuff that we teach in our intensive programs, right? So you have to think about all those states and explain all those states, because the engineer has to code each one of those. And if they can't code it, then they're kind of pissed off at you. Okay. And if you don't give it, but then 2 months later, you say, no, I imagined this. Now you're going to have a conflict between engineering and you.
Right.
Okay. So from your end, you need to be very, very tight in setting up expectations with your engineers. And your requirements have to be very tight. Okay. That's it. Now, when you give it to engineering, and engineering basically takes that feature, and now, what you do is they launch something. What you do is you do something called a delta document. This is the requirement I gave you. This is what you gave me. Here is all the deltas. Here are all the mistakes. Do that 2 times. The 3rd time, the engineer will follow your spec to the dot.
Sure, sir. Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know if there is time for a follow-up question. If there is not, I will.
No. So unfortunately, I have to jump out at the call right now, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah. But it's been great. One thing I will say is, guys, let's turn on our cameras next time, because what I'm going to do is, if you're not turning on the cameras, I'm not going to start talking. So that's what I would say. All right. But thank you very much, guys. I think this has been a really awesome experience. And I'm going to drop off now with your permission.
Thank you
so much, Prasad.
All right. Good. Sure. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. Bye. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye.